Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? We are a minute or so behind here in getting started, but welcome to the Empowerly webinar, The Importance of the Humanities. We do want to give everybody a couple of minutes to go ahead and get logged in and check out what we're doing here today. So first thing we want to do is just get a feel for folks for where they're from around the country. If you are from the West Coast, the East Coast, the South, wherever you may be from, feel free to write into the chat the city and where you're signing in from. We'd love to hear from you about that. We got folks from kind of all over. Looks like we got some folks from Northern California who are in the webinar, so that's great. Also, a couple of people in here from the East Coast. San Diego. There we go. Ohio. All right. Tina, excellent. Nice to have you join us. Christina. Who else do we have? Feel free to let us know where you're from. Maryland, Rhode Island, love it, all over the country. We'll give folks another couple of minutes here and then we will get started. So I see we also have folks here from the Chicagoland area. Welcome. And also Texas. Wow, we're really getting a good mixture of folks from everywhere here. Okay, we'll give folks another few seconds here to log on and then we'll get started. All right, a couple of folks here from good old New York City. We love that as well. All right, I think we are ready to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Let me go ahead and kind of go over what our agenda is going to be. First, we're going to cover what are the humanities, in other words, things that don't have right answers, career potential, future tech, CEO, college admissions strategy, how to stand out from the crowd, and then extracurricular development, as well as Q&A. So let me go ahead and start by introducing Eli. He's our lead counselor. I'll let you tell him a little bit about his background, and then I'll introduce myself as well, and we'll get started. Eli, take it away. So we're having a little bit of trouble, I think, hearing you, Eli. Are you on mute? Just check your thing there. We're not quite hearing you, I don't think.
Microphone test. Is that working now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Microphone is live. All right, we're doing it. Great to be here. Great to see everyone. So I am a lead counselor at Empowerly. And before that, I was a missions coach for a bit more than 10 years, and I ran an admissions academy in Midtown West for many years. And before that, I was also an arts journalist and curator at a number of venues around New York. And for me, I'm excited to give this seminar because I was always a humanities nerd, for lack of a better word. When I was growing up in high school, I loved thinking about what makes for a good story. I would write my own short stories. I liked thinking about how society was put together and why and what that meant. And when I started admissions coaching, I began to realize that not everyone had that same enthusiasm necessarily. And even when they did, sometimes they would actively try to move away from it, or their families would try to move them away from it. And I could really understand that, because we live in a technological society that seems like science and engineering are super important. And we see every day, new discoveries, new inventions. And it feels like either that or maybe business or possibly medicine are the paths to get ahead and have a great career. And I actually think the more that I've looked into this now, that there's some hidden advantages to the humanities that I wanted to tell people about, who are not necessarily already committed to arts or music or acting or an English scholarship, but rather people that maybe are a little bit hesitant or potentially have an interest and aren't sure if it's a good path for them. So I created this webinar more or less to speak to those people and tell you about why humanities might be something you should take a second look at.
Great. Thank you, Eli. And we're going to let you take over again here in a minute. My name is John. I've been at Empowerly for quite some time now, and I'm a former teacher myself. I used to teach history, math, and French on the Upper West Side in New York City. And I really do love working with our families and really showing them how Empowerly can help strengthen their students' profiles and just making sure that we provide them with their best opportunity to develop their best chances for getting into their dream schools and as many of the schools that are on their list as possible. And with that said, I'll tell you a little bit more about our approach and our process a little bit later. But for now, let's go ahead and switch back to Eli. And Eli, we can go ahead and actually get started. Before we do that, Eli, we actually might run a quick poll. So if my colleague Madeline, I don't know if you're ready to launch our first poll. We do kind of have a few polls here we're going to run before, in between some of the information that we're sharing there with you. So hopefully we can get our first poll launched. And we really want to see what's the breakdown, whether we have students, parents, or parents and students together. So if you do have a minute and can go ahead and just answer the poll numbers, that would be great. Looks like we've got a good mix of student only as well as parent or guardian and parent and student together. We also have some others as well. So a good breakdown here, a good mix. Thanks for sharing that, and welcome everyone, and we'll go ahead and get started. And with that, Eli, I'll turn the deck over to you with this first slide here.
All right, so career, social impact, and admissions. I think these are the biggest questions for people when they think about, is the humanities right for them? In terms of intrinsic enjoyment and passion, right? People can love art, people can love studying literature, people can like studying history. But how does this really function in a world that, as we've said, is increasingly dominated by technology? So there's a couple stories that I would like to tell you that I think can help illustrate this. And there's some people up on the screen, and my question to you is, what do they all have in common? While you think about that, I'm going to first tell you about Caitlin Gleason. Caitlin Gleason, so she was a theater arts major at Stony Brook. She was an actor. That's where her passion lay, and she pursued it intensively through college and after. And she found that when she started looking for work, her ability to persuade people as an actor and compel them worked really well in sales. So she joined the sales force of a health tech company and discovered that, there's a huge headache that people had to deal with when they went to the doctor's office, which is that billing was incredibly complicated. And she started a company when she was 24, 25, which today is valued more than $1 billion. It's the leading company in the space, which helps people streamline their billing, helps doctors' offices. And she recruited some engineers, but she was incredibly compelling at selling the vision to everyone, including technology people. And I think stories like this of humanities based students being really, really successful in a technology based world are actually much more common than you would think. And there's a couple other people I want to mention here. Some of them you may be more familiar with, some you may be less familiar with, but they all kind of dominate Silicon Valley business, those kinds of areas that you would think might be led by engineers. Michael Seibel, he was a political science major at Yale, and he worked on campaigns for Senate before taking a road trip with some of his friends who were programmers and starting a company that became Twitch, just for live streaming, sold to Amazon for around $1 billion. And he was the business side, and now he's the CEO of the largest technology incubator, Y Combinator, helping technology companies scale to become huge and powerful. George Soros, for those who think, if they want to go into business, that studying business is the only way. George Soros was a philosophy major at Oxford. And not only did he get his undergrad, he was still polishing his dissertation, even for his PhD in philosophy, well after he had started a hedge fund. And he was still working on his philosophy dissertation, even as he was scaling his hedge fund to billions of dollars in accounts. So I think that these are really interesting examples of how humanities can actually work in surprising ways. But why does it actually work like that? I mean, that actually seems pretty surprising. So maybe we can dig more into what about the humanities works in technology. So here's Reid Hoffman, who was a co-founder of PayPal. He not only got his undergrad in philosophy, but also did a master's in philosophy. And he chose to do that rather than business, even though I think he knew that what he wanted to do was in business area. And what he says is, by studying the essence of human nature, he had an education in how humans interact with each other in the world. So that's a critical part of humanities. It's fundamentally a study of people and their motivations. And when it came time for him to innovate and start a world-changing platform, sold to Microsoft for, I believe, $26 billion, somewhere around that, but more importantly, became the leading way that people connect professionally, he had to invent kind of from scratch how people are going to interact in a new platform. And actually, a business degree, he says, could not have really helped him do that, because a business degree could teach him many things about management, but was based in old models, repeatable models of how to do business, rather than thinking through from scratch how a new platform would work. So he credits the humanities and philosophy in particular with that success. Going back a little further, some of you may have heard or seen this guy. He founded Apple Computer, creating one of the first personal computers, and went on to create many world-changing technology hits. The iPod, the iPhone, maybe some of you have one. If you have a MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, it's this guy. Actually, if any of you have a MacBook and you just want to feel how cool it feels and look at why this is a really attractive computer, this was his vision, that computers could actually be aesthetically attractive and really nice to use. And no one else actually shared that vision originally. People thought he was crazy. Oh, computers are just about code. But he says, technology is not enough. It's technology married with the humanities that yield great results. And he was the one to see that great design would actually be an advantage. He went to Reed College. He studied calligraphy, and he credits calligraphy and other humanities pursuits with the ability to make his computers really aesthetic, studying the history of culture and art. So I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind when you think about innovation and building the future, not just STEM. So what are the humanities? John, I don't know if there's a poll attached to this one, or you want to?
Yes, there is, for sure. Madeline, if you can run the next poll for us, that would be great. So this particular poll, folks, is just for us to get an idea of your student's graduation year. If you've got a quick minute to let us know, that would be great. Looks like we've got some rising juniors, some rising sophomores. Ooh, and a couple of maybe 8th graders too. Like it. Middle schoolers. Very nice. All right. Okay, let's continue then. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's go ahead.
Right. So things that don't have right answers. I mean, in a way, that sounds kind of crazy. Like if you're going to set out to study something and it doesn't have a right answer, how are you even judged for that? How do you know that there's even something to learn? Which is, I think, why some people feel more comfortable in STEM and math, or at least you can say in math, you got the question right. But I still would say there's a big difference in skill set between someone that is very good at the humanities and someone that is not. And there's actually a really lot to learn, which is kind of concealed by this fact. So if you think about watching a TV show that you might enjoy, I don't know if you like Stranger Things, maybe sitcoms, Curb Your Enthusiasm, something else. I would suggest to you that if you started watching a TV show and it didn't have someone making it that really understood story, that really understood how to film, that really understood acting, you wouldn't watch for more than 2 minutes. You'd immediately turn it off. It would just be terrible. And the people that make TV shows are examples of people that are trained in the humanities and are able to keep you immersed in a fictional world, which sounds easy, but it's actually really, really difficult to do. And similarly for like a lawyer who's maybe defending you against a crime, if they didn't know how to keep the jury's attention, if they didn't know how to use logic and reason, if they weren't compelling, charismatic, you would be in big trouble. So these are actually areas which have huge differences between being really, really good at them and not being good at them. But what's scary about them a little bit is that they require other people to make those judgments. But these are skills that are kind of hiding in plain sight that are really important. So let's talk a little bit about what they are. What are the humanities? If you wanted to study humanities, what are they and where would you study them? So the humanities are actually not one thing. There's kind of a gradient. There's a scale of how humanities-ish they are, like kind of super humanities. And then as you go down, you actually get things that start to look a little bit more like STEM, but it's not either or. It's actually kind of a continuum. So, on one side, you have the arts, visual art, theater, dance. These things are really just creative. There's no kind of system of analysis for these. It has a lot to do with intuition, has a lot to do with just creating symbols and seeing how they affect other people. Then a little bit after that, you have the scholarship of those, people studying how those work. Then kind of in the middle, you have things like history, philosophy, and some of these are actually applicable to STEM. So for instance, there's philosophy of science, there's philosophy of technology, there's understanding the context behind how and why technology works, how and why society works. And these start to use some more scientific skills. And I think when people work with a counselor or think about their extracurriculars, so I think something that's really important is to expose people to these areas. So maybe through a summer program, maybe through an online class, to see if some of these areas that you might not think of pursuing actually might be right for you. These have whole departments at universities, and some of these skills are actually incredibly valuable. But I think everyone's not aware of them to the same degree because of the press. At the far end, you have majors like cognitive science. These are kind of interdisciplinary. So let's say you have some knowledge of computer science, but you're also interested in neuroscience, and you're also interested in philosophy. There's ways to combine these interests actually into very unique majors, like cognitive science, like history of science and technology, that might actually showcase your strengths better than just humanities or just STEM. So this is kind of a gray area between STEM and humanities that can be really strong as a direction. Okay, calling this a hidden edge, and this is what I mean. Humanities is sometimes can be very powerful in your career and your admissions journey, but it's not necessarily immediately evident to people for a few reasons. It's a less defined path, right? It's a little bit less obvious what you're going to do with this. Success is a little bit harder to measure. And when you look at the average salaries, I think this is something that gets a lot of families. You look at this average salary for an art history or art or acting degree, and you're including all the people that try to be artists, which is true. If you're going to try to be an actor, if you're going to try to be a visual artist, if you're going to try to teach English, the salaries for this are not super high. And so that's going to affect the average. But if you are interested in not a profession like that, but in a high salary, high earning profession, there are other professions that do include the humanities very deeply, which, as we will find out, do actually pay a lot. So you can't always be scared by those average salaries. So why humanities, I think, can be such a big advantage, which I'm going to highlight for you guys even more as we go along, is that we live in this very competitive world now. I don't know if you guys have seen, some of the rates of admission at top universities, but they've gotten very low. And that same effect is replicated in the workforce, in part because there's globally so much more competition. Someone from India, someone from China, someone from Vietnam, someone from the Philippines, someone from Romania can compete over the internet for the same kinds of positions that anyone else can compete. And that's really a force from the last few years that have made a lot of careers much more challenging. So why do the humanities come into play as an advantage? Part of that is, as we saw with Steve Jobs, you want to know how to create something that people like, Businesses exist to serve people. So good design, empathy, understanding how people work and what makes them happy. These are really important competitive traits when you have engineers from all over the world that are skilled in technology. And not only that, but being able to communicate in stories. People are moved by stories. So if you have technology coming from all over, but you have people that have studied the history of narrative, how to make a really compelling story, you can make a product or a company stand out much more, or a political platform or anything else stand out much more than otherwise. And companies know this, and colleges know this. So that's actually why people who are trained in the humanities are getting an edge in a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, fewer people are studying those areas. So in a way, that becomes a way to stand out much more. Someone that was early to see this, I think, in line with stories of people that have become very successful through the humanities. Peter Thiel, he studied philosophy and symbolic systems at Stanford. And he was one of the founders of PayPal, along with Reid Hoffman. And he was one of the earliest investors in Facebook, and which is now obviously worth many billions of dollars. And his argument is, don't try to compete in just what everyone else is doing, right? The world is so competitive now that really doesn't work. Look at where the areas where people are actually not competing. And his second point is, look to things that are not obvious. Try to find the thing that not everyone else knows. And the humanities is actually a path to discover things that everyone is not aware of, especially when those things concern people. So another example, what do I mean by something that not everyone else knows? So take Airbnb. Lets you rent out someone's apartment, a room in someone else's apartment. The founders of that company, which is now a public company, they realized that that experience could be even better than a hotel, which everyone else thought was crazy, right? They were designers. They weren't primarily coders, the founders of that. They went to RISD, and they saw a secret about people that created the next new thing. And so people at the top of these companies are now going and recruiting other humanities graduates because they created these really successful companies. They know what it takes. So now they want other people that can think out of the box, that can think creatively. And it's not just the world of technology that this is true of. It's also expanded to other fields, are now looking for humanities training in who they look at. So med schools, that's one where you think, oh, the path to medicine is biology, right? It's just shadowing doctors and then also doing biology research, maybe. But if you think about it, medical schools and colleges get tons of applications like this. I did some biology research, I shadowed a few doctors, and I did some volunteering. But medical schools get 4 or 5% or less of their applicants. So who are they getting? People that show a different skill set, people that show a different edge. And that, for them, is often humanities, I think, because they want physicians that are empathetic, can communicate, that are good at teamwork, that are good at actually being creative in how they approach patient care. And finally, data science. This is another area where you think it's just a technological area, but data requires interpretation, right? Data requires stories to be written about it. So by collaborating with humanities professionals, data in this very data-driven world actually can speak much louder. So the result of that is actually humanities grads can command quite high salaries when it comes to the workforce. So if you look at careers like a product manager, these are often humanities grads. Sometimes they have some coding experience, but they're working with teams of marketers, teams of coders all together. Average salary above 131,000. Or PR manager, they're spreading the word about company or organization, which is a really important skill because showing the company's story or the organization's story or the narrative is one of the key things that lets it stand out. So these professions have become quite desirable. And not only that, they also have very high rates of satisfaction. So that's another thing besides the money we have to consider just what's enjoyable doing day in and day out. And humanities degrees have very high satisfaction, over 90%. Okay. John, was there a poll here?
Let's do another one. I think we have one or two left.
Yeah. Okay.
Madeline, would you be good enough to start our next poll, please? All right, everyone. We're hearing all this good information from Eli about humanities. Are you interested in studying the humanities? So we've got about 66% that are unsure, but about 33% that for sure are interested. Now it's going the other way. So interesting to look at the results here. About 60% of say yes. So, okay.
All
Thank you, everyone, for participating. Eli, go ahead.
All right. Well, so careers, great. But some of you are probably thinking about what does this mean for getting into college? And here, I have to talk just quickly about my own experience here. I've worked as an admissions coach for a bit over a decade. I've coached hundreds of students of all disciplines. So a lot of CS students, a lot of biology, a lot of healthcare. Also arts applicants. And what I will say is, when I get students that have really stellar results, like every cycle I have one or two students that get into so many top 20 schools in one cycle. And in those cases, humanities is almost always a key part of their application. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of them, which I think might be eye-opening. And these are examples I see repeated year after year of these kinds of students actually getting really great results. So this is Andrew, not his real name, but I'll never tell you actual students' names of mine. Just like if you were my student, I wouldn't tell anyone yours. He was both a sculptor and, his long-term goal is to be a doctor. But in the meantime, he was really passionate about philosophy. And he found philosophers to connect with when he was a high school student at universities nearby and did mentored research with them, studied philosophy. And he applied early to Columbia. He got in, focusing on a major in philosophy, and then wrote his thesis on the philosophy of consciousness, which means kind of asking hard questions about what is consciousness? What makes someone intelligent? Can a machine be intelligent? How do I know that someone else is conscious? How do I know that John is conscious? I mean, I see him talking there, but how do I really know that? And his long-term career path was neurology. But I think if we think about how this helped him stand out, he got into almost every medical school he applied to, including Brown, which has a 2.6 acceptance rate. It's such a hard school. I think to understand why that is, you have to think about what the admissions officer is thinking. How do they choose? And I think one of the most misunderstood things is they're not just looking for average, really smart students, right? Because their admissions rates are too low for that. And they have more students than they could possibly admit. So if you're just an average, typical student that has really good stats and grades, when it comes to the most selective schools, they have no reason to let you in. But they're looking for actually something special and unusual that clues them in that all right, one day maybe this person's going to write an amazing book, right? Or start an amazing company or do something really unusual that is going to get us lots of prestige, because that's how these universities became that way in the first place. So when they see someone like this, they say, oh, that's a little bit unusual, right? But not only that, this is someone that's asking really hard questions. They're thinking about fundamental knowledge, right? They're not just doing some lab research, but they might revolutionize everything, right? So Brown there with their 2% acceptances, that might be a risk they're willing to take. Everyone they're going to let in has to be someone that they could do something world-changing. And having a humanities element can show that you're asking really hard questions and might do something special and unusual. So here's another one. Southern California represented, which a lot of our students are here from California. And she was interested in education. And she was also a composer, which I think was cool, not just a musician, but composing her own music and developing a portfolio in that area. And her whole application was about designing educational curriculum and the challenges she saw with education and how it wasn't serving students. She wrote a really bold kind of manifesto in her essays about how education was broken and how she was going to help change it. And I think that was cool. That was a really big vision for her to put forward, right? Not just how she was going to, belong to some clubs and, she's going to do some research, but like she was going to do something with major social impact, right? And she went in and she studied it again from kind of first principles, like why do we need education? What's it for? She interned for a startup, but I think her application really stood out because it was so focused, built around mission and passion. And I think leading universities want to see leaders. So when she got into Cornell, Duke, Berkeley, USC, that was what they saw, not just another student with strong stats, which they have infinite numbers of students with strong stats. Okay. So another student, which I think is an interesting case, this is going to be the last one, although I could go on like this with so many cases. He was a computer science student as well. He was a programmer, but he also had an interest in classics. And that kind of became one of the core points of his application, that he did this summer program, studied Latin in Rome. He presented a research paper on Aristotle. He was the president of the Classics Club. He was also really strong in math and CS. I think the top universities like Harvard, Stanford, they love to see a student like this, right? With some deep humanities interests, showing they're a world citizen, showing they're accessing ancient wisdom, really compelling for a leader. But that also has hard technical skills to show that they're rigorous. So when I see outcomes like this, like every top school, Ivy League, it's one of the strongest profiles, like a deep humanities interest, but also technical skills behind it that show rigor. So humanities STEM, it doesn't have to be either or, right? Those skills can actually be complementary and work really well. So here's my little chart: STEM skills, humanities skills. And I think good counselors, what we're doing is from a very early age, if you're starting in 9th grade, 8th grade, some of you are that young, we're having a conversation, right, about where your skills lie. We're assessing your skills. We're going to figure out this interesting path for you and set you up for the best success possible. And so STEM concentrators versus humanities concentrators have different skills sets, but they are also overlapping. So there's some shared in common, but who gravitates towards one or the other, I think, depends what fundamental skills they have and what the best use of those skills are. And it's not a set thing, right? Like students can develop an interest somewhere in 9th grade and pursue that and actually study these skills, get better at them by doing things. These aren't just like innate abilities. You don't have an innate ability to be a physicist or an innate ability to be an artist or philosopher. These are things you can develop over the course of high school. And how do you do that, right? Or if you have an ability or passion, what do you actually do in the humanities area to set yourself apart and show? So working with your counselor especially, I think that the counseling relationship is a way to really help identify what these opportunities are and how to actually succeed in them. There's art competitions, so that's a big one. There are readings and courses that you can pursue outside of your high school, right? Your high school has some classes, right? It has English and history, but we talked about so many more, right? We talked about philosophy. Does your high school have a philosophy class? Does your high school have a media studies or an anthropology class, right? Are you studying art history? Maybe not. But the most successful students go outside their high school and find opportunities to actually pursue these before they get to college. And then they often end up doing research in some of those areas, right? If you think back to that student that got into Stanford or Harvard, he went and actually did external research and then went and presented that research. Writing and publishing, I think, is another great one. Building a blog, building your own track record, showing your own ideas is very important. If colleges see that you're going the extra mile to actually create your own perspective and get that perspective out in the world, that's a huge plus. All right, so I'm going to let John take it from this part because he can tell you a little bit more about how that process works at Empowerly and how we help students explore and set them up for success.
Great. Thank you, Eli. I appreciate that. Before we jump into that, I think we have one more poll left, right, Madeline? Let's go ahead and get that last poll out there. I think we got one left. Let's see if we can get that going. All right. How confident do you feel about your college major choice? All right. We'll give this one a minute here. Half of you say positive so far and half say unsure. Now it's spreading out a little bit. So interesting. Interesting results. All right. Looks like about a third of you know what you want, a third have no idea, and the rest is divided between somewhat sure and pretty sure. So that sounds about right. Exactly. Okay, so in terms of Empowerly and what we do in helping our students prepare for college, in the 8th grade, it really is about preparing for high school and the challenges that it presents. And that's going to include all kinds of things from identifying potential extracurriculars early on to possible leadership opportunities. And that actually is something that happens in each of the early grades in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. We're looking at those things constantly. And then really thinking about putting together an initial extracurricular resume, starting to think about course selection, things like that, all the while working on writing skills with practice essays and practice prompts. In the 9th grade, it's really about exploring what is the student interested in, okay? And then from there, really working on relationship building, continuing to work on writing skills, cultivating study habits. Some students really need some help figuring out and learning how to study. All the while, we can offer advice on course selection. Some high schools offer APs in the 9th grade, so that might be something to consider, as well as other types of challenging classes. Those are important to consider as well. And then all through 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, we are looking at potential internship opportunities, summer programs that might make sense, and really just in the 9th grade, building out that high school roadmap for success. So that in the 10th grade, we're continuing to develop those interests, again, really hone in on internships that make sense, extracurricular development, volunteer opportunities, if none are in place already, so that by the time we get to 11th grade, we're really starting to think about those colleges that might make the most sense, building out that college list, thinking about SAT and ACT strategy. A lot of schools right now are test optional. Some are even test blind through 2024, but that could change radically after that. We're not sure yet where it's going to go. But planning for AP or IP exams, we can help advise on that, as well as competitions, STEM competitions, things like that that help strengthen a student's profile and shows their love of learning. All the while, leadership opportunities are always great to explore, as well as self-guided projects. And then, of course, looking for merit scholarships. And depending on how students do in school, they may or may not qualify for merit scholarships. We can help look for those. And the goal is really to start the application process in April of junior year so that we get going with meeting with the counselors in ninth, 10th, and 11th grade, typically once a month. By the spring of 11th grade, that escalates to bi-weekly. And then by senior year, sometime probably in the beginning, middle, or late summer, as students start to work on their essays, they're starting to meet with their counselors once a week. We want to ideally have that list finalized by the beginning of the summer of 12th grade, before 12th grade starts, if not by midsummer at the latest, so you can figure out early decision or early action for which schools you want for that. And then, of course, major selection is actually another strategy as well. It could be that, for example, a CS student, there are a lot of computer science students, as you can imagine. It may make more sense for us to think about an adjacent major that might make more sense, that has a higher rate of acceptance. So things like that we look at. We can also talk about which are the better letters of recommendation to ask for. We can help finish up scholarship applications. If students get deferred or waitlisted, we can help them write a letter of continued interest, and of course, help them prepare for any interviews they may have and just get them ready to go. In terms of our process, we do believe in a dynamic, holistic team approach. The person that the student will be meeting with most often will be the college counselor. However, when it does come time in senior year to work on and submit the final drafts of the supplemental essays, we'll have them work with our writing specialists, and they're an accomplished group of authors and editors. They've literally helped hundreds of our students work on thousands of supplemental essays, and their goal is really to make sure that those essays are unique and the students are representing their best selves possible. We also have an admissions committee review that we offer in senior year, and that's where one of our former top 25 college admissions officers will review one or more of our seniors' applications and just make sure there are no red flags. They'll look for any weaknesses. Typically, they do this about 3 to 4 weeks before the applications are due, so that there's plenty of time for the student to make updates. We also have an expert research team, and this research team can do pretty much research anything in the college admissions and applications process. Anything from figuring out what are the top 10 accepted majors at a particular school, to looking for possible local in-person internships that might make sense for a student, that type of thing. And then finally, we have the community manager. And the community manager is really the direct line of support for the family if they have any questions about anything along the way. And then just to talk a little bit about our success rates, it is important to remember that schools are really looking at two things in particular. The most important thing is going to be GPA. The second thing, and by GPA, what we mean is unweighted GPA. And the second thing is, in most cases, it's going to be test scores as well. For many schools right now, they are test optional. And for the UC schools, they're test blind. So that's not the case. And it could be that they will be looking at AP exam scores. So it's important for us to say that for qualified students, we can significantly help increase their chances of getting into competitive schools. I'd say anywhere from 3 times the normal rate to many times higher, depending on the student's qualifications to apply to those schools, and also the student themselves in terms of what they've been able to accomplish. So for those of you that we have not yet met with, we'd love to offer you a free consultation. to tell you more about our services, how our programs work. You can book your free consultation today at empowerly.com/consult. You can also email us directly at enrollment@empowerly.com with any questions that you have, and we can take it from there. And I believe we're right now here at the 45-minute mark. We do have a few more minutes, I believe, to take any questions that we have in there. So let's see. Madeline, I think you're going to facilitate those for Eli. And Eli, if you have a few minutes to answer some questions from our folks, that would be great. So Madeline is going to get those to you. And then if you can just read them out loud and then just go ahead and answer them, that would be ideal.
Great. So I like these questions. I mean, many of these questions I'm seeing so far could be whole books written. So I'm going to try to give a quick gloss on this. So tips on how to get to Yale University. So I've had a lot of students get into Yale University. This is something I'm pretty familiar with. I think things that Yale really likes. So personality is very important to them. Yale students are very socially effective. Like everyone is nice. And they have a lot of short questions that are kind of designed to tell this. When you write the Yale supplements, if you come across as just kind of dry and academic, or you just tell a kind of linear story, Yale is not going to be excited about you. They want students that are dynamic. Yale is a very artsy school. They have the theater, they have the art school, they have the architecture, they have music is very important there. I would say what I've said about the importance of the humanities and combining kind of humanities and STEM goes double for Yale. But that doesn't mean they can't be a STEM focused person, right? You'll see students get in that are have really impressive physics research, and they're also an electronic musician or something like that. Like they're a DJ, or they're a violinist and they did Fourier transformation, some kind of mathematical analysis of sound waves to see what the best method for playing violin is. Yale also is not a super strong CS school. So what some people may have told you about the CS disadvantage, actually, this is sort of reverse of what I just said, but for computer science especially, you actually can get a better advantage at Yale by being a really brilliant coder than you might be able to get at some other schools like Carnegie Mellon, Harvard even, Stanford. So those are a few quick things. Another thing I'll say about Yale, research is a good way to appeal to Yale because they have a STEM research supplement where you can put multiple STEM research. So students with that, but that also have an arts portfolio, I think those are really good. And personality in the essays, very important. Okay, what are some ways to stand out in the college admissions process? So not to just restate the theme of this whole presentation again, but I'm getting a message from Connie, who's our head of counseling here, who was a former admissions officer at Brown. And she said that recruiters from Google, Amazon, Apple actually came to campus specifically to recruit humanities and interdisciplinary majors. Ways to stand out. So that would more be ways to stand out to career and just says more about the importance of the humanities. Ways to stand out to colleges. I think the biggest thing that helps you stand out for colleges is finding a compelling purpose that your application is about. And when I say purpose, I mean the intersection of what you like and are good at and problems that need solving in the world. So your counselor should help you figure that out, right? What are problems in the world that you care about solving? And how do those relate to the specific things that you're interested in? If you think hard about that, you're going to be less likely to do just what everyone else does because everyone else is just going to do some debate club, some robotics club, maybe an internship somewhere. And it's all going to kind of be disconnected, right? Maybe they're in student government, maybe they're in newspaper. colleges like all that stuff to a degree, but it's not going to help you really stand out. Whereas showing dedication to a kind of problem in the world that you really care about and having it match your enthusiasm of how to solve it, that's going to be really interesting to colleges, as long as it shows up throughout your extracurriculars in the various things you do, whether that's research, whether that you start a nonprofit or a company. Those things can really help you stand out. Does architecture fall under the humanities? I would say yes, absolutely. So remember that humanities is a scale, right? Humanities isn't all one thing, so it's not, everything isn't the same degree of humanities-ish. So maybe dance is a little bit more pure humanities than architecture, but because architecture has some math, some engineering knowledge can be helpful, but architecture is really an artistic pursuit also. So to be successful as a pre-architecture major, you need to have a strong visual art background. So you need to have a good portfolio that shows your ability to draw and paint. But architecture is a little bit more on the technical side, because you should also show that you can use software like AutoCAD. You should be able to show that you can draw technical diagrams. You should maybe try to intern with an architect, which is something that your counselor can help you find. So architecture is a really interesting one because it does kind of combine humanities and STEM, just like Steve Jobs was talking about. So that's a really good question. Can you speak to what some career options for language studies might be? So first of all, I would say that language studies can be really effective as a major for any business-related career. If you go on to do an MBA, or you do an internship with a company and you're doing sales or business development or marketing, business is global these days, right? So it's highly valuable to have multiple languages. Let's say English, Chinese, and German, right? Now you're able to speak to people in some of the biggest business markets in the world. And just having to rely on Google Translate just isn't the same if you're dealing with the nuances of intercultural communication, if you're dealing with the nuances of customers and of markets, right? You really want someone that has native speech and native sensitivity to that. So that's one thing that language studies definitely can be useful for. Of course, there's also the foreign service, right? There's also working for governments and as a diplomat, office of a diplomat. I think that's comparatively minor compared to the business application. And there's also, of course, teaching and academia and translating and all those things. But I think you shouldn't underestimate the degree to which it's important just for the private sector. All right, I think that's so far all the questions that I've gotten. And you should also feel free to ask John any questions about the process at Empowerly and how everything works. I can also speak to that too, because I am a lead counselor, so I have a lot to do with the counseling side. So yeah, otherwise I think we're gonna reach time pretty soon and wrap up.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Eli, for all of the information today on the humanities and why humanities. We appreciate all of that. I want to thank all of our attendees today for showing up and participating and asking questions. I'm pretty sure we're going to wrap up now. Let's see.
One more question I'm seeing.
One more question. Go ahead, Eli.
How do I connect my purpose and love for communication to medicine? I think that's a really interesting question. So one thing I will say is that among the medical field, so among great practitioners of the medical field, you will find great writers. Like, for instance, Atul Gawande is a writer that publishes in the New Yorkers, one of the leading magazines, who writes very compellingly about issues of public health, issues of health economics. You'll also see writers like Oliver Sacks, who's a neurologist who writes incredible books with case studies that give deep insights into the nature of the human mind. And I think you'll also find many other examples of that. So I think writing can be a really great and important way, writing and publishing. And also in the scope of like medical volunteering, right? Service is really important when it comes to medicine because medicine isn't just about abstract knowledge about anatomy. Medicine is really about connecting with people. So in the context of creating really compelling initiatives that will serve patients, not just through technology or science or anatomy, but also through care and connection and service. Those are two things that I think are really important. I could write a whole book on that also because I've worked with pre-med students for a long time, but those are a couple ways just for now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eli. With that, everyone, we are going to wish you good night. And if you do have any questions for us, for either me or for Eli, go ahead and send them to the enrollment@empowerly.com inbox. We'll be happy to get those to Eli and to myself. And we encourage you to also, if you want to, you can sign up for a free consultation here if you have not done so already. At empowerly.com/consult. And with that, I think we're all done. So Eli, if you can close us out and wrap us up. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure doing the webinar with you, and thank you for attending. Yes, there will be a recording. We will have it. Somebody asked.
Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.